Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Giordano, and today I'm joined by Breanna Wilson, a travel writer and adventurer specializing in solo travel, overlanding, and all things Mongolia, where she also runs small group adventure tours with her company, Meanwhile in Mongolia. In this episode, Breanna and I discuss what you need to know about overlanding in Mongolia, including the best season, vehicle import details, and what to do outside of your vehicle. Breanna also shares more about her journey from Georgia to Mongolia in her trusty 78 series Troopy and reflects on some of her favorite moments in Mongolia. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this episode on all things Mongolia.
Experience the Great Smoky Mountain Jeep Invasion with Hankook Dynapro Tire on expeditionportal.com. An impressive event with attendees from all over the country and a parade of Jeeps that stretched all the way through town.
Welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. Today, my guest is Breanna Wilson of Meanwhile in Mongolia. Thank you so much, Breanna, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yay! So, Breanna, you spend a lot of time in Mongolia. You're a regular Forbes contributor and a guide and travel writer. Is there anything you don't do?
It seems like I do it all these days. Yes. Guiding, driving, exploring Mongolia. Yeah, that's my time.
Great. So you spend most of your year in Mongolia, but you're currently in the US. So you come back from time to time.
Yes. So I'm in Pittsburgh right now. This is where I grew up. It's the holidays, so I usually come back this time of year to spend time with family, but I will go back to Mongolia soon. And yeah, I've spent about 10 months a year in Mongolia these days. So it's almost time to go back.
Very nice. And you have your 78 series Troopy there, which is what you use to travel around and guide, I imagine.
Yes. So Troopy is my vehicle when I'm not on trips. And then it also does come on some of our trips. And it acts as like our headquarters, so to say, where, we have the kitchen out of that. We have the fridge, freezer, water, everything we need. So it doesn't come on every trip and it will start coming on less trips. But yeah, it does go out from time to time. And then when it's not with me on tours and I'm not on tours, I take it out and drive all around the country. I try to see as much and as many places that I haven't seen to this point. I'm always trying to explore the new corners and see different things. So yeah, I try to take it out as much as possible. Usually when the weather is agreeable, which is usually about April to October.
Nice. I'd love to get into, because the Troopy is not from Mongolia. It's actually from somewhere else. So I'd like to get into that at some point in this episode. We'll chat about how you got the Troopy to Mongolia. But first, I'd like to know why Mongolia. So you said you are from the US and I don't know if you spent your childhood, most of your childhood there, but I guess bring us back to the beginning. How did
how it all started?
Yeah.
So I went to Mongolia in 2018 kind of on a whim. I didn't really know anything about it. I had sort of just seen a picture on Instagram and said to myself, like, I want to do that. It just looks crazy and wild and so different from anything I sort of did to that point. And so when I went for the first time, I went to go visit the reindeer tribe, which is in the really far north of the country. And it took a flight with 2 days of off-roading and then 2 days of horseback just to reach the tribe. And I, at this point, had never really camped. I had never spent like time like this outdoors. So I was so out of my depth and so uncomfortable. But because I sort of did it and I learned so many things along the way, I think I cried along the way. I was so out of my depth because also everybody on the trip was, they raced horses and then there was me. I had not ridden a horse in like 15 years. I was wearing my chaps the wrong way. I had like a snowboarding helmet instead of an actual riding helmet. And they were all looking at me like, who is this person? Why is she here? And, I definitely was so out of my comfort zone on that trip. But that was that moment where I was kind of like, it's good for me to be out of my comfort zone in this sort of way that's so pure and so connected to the earth and, so wild and free. And I just sort of couldn't get enough of that feeling after I did it. So I ended up going back in 2019 and I spent 6 months in the country at that time. And when I had gone back, the purpose of going back was to tried to develop motorcycle tours, and those tours were with Urals. So the motorcycles with the sidecars. So when I
Yeah.
went back, within the first month of going back, I did all the planning, and I was doing it with another friend, my friend Eric. And so when we went back, we did all the planning and mapping and routing. And the point was to go visit some of the herder families that he knew and that were, in this area called, Orhan Valley in central Mongolia. And so we planned and bought the bikes and got everything ready. And then we took the Ural out and sort of developed this route and this sort of journey that we wanted to eventually take people on because, yeah, I also wanted other people to start to experience this feeling that I sort of had. And so the point in doing that trip was that we were going to develop it and launch it as a tour in 2020 and start doing tours. But that sort of didn't work out for obvious reasons. But it led me to sort of, have that experience there in a different way, on a motorcycle instead of a horse and to see different parts of the country. And I just started to fall in love with, yeah, the culture and the people and just the ability to explore by any means possible. Yeah, we were going to do the tours in 2020. Obviously, that didn't work out, but as soon as I could go back, and I think it was about 2021, I went back just by myself and, just spent time there actually just living, seeing what it was like to be, a local in Ulaanbaatar and exploring the city and making friends. And now it's home. I mean, now I can't imagine not going there and spending really as much as my time as possible there, even in the city. I have an apartment in the city center and, friends and everything else. So it's home now. It's my happy place.
And that's not the only place that you've been outside of the US that you've lived in.
No, so during the pandemic, so when the pandemic started, I was actually in Mongolia, and that was February 2020. And I had an assignment in Iran. So I was determined to go on that assignment because I had gotten the visa as an American. That was like such a big deal. So I left Mongolia as everything was closing down, thinking this cannot possibly last a long time. I'll start flying there. I'll get to Iran. It'll all blow over, whatever. And then I got to Turkey and everything was closing, and I was realizing like, oh crap, I need to go back to Mongolia. But as soon as I had landed, they had closed the airport there because obviously being next to China, they were really worried about their borders and, the risk of everything spreading within the country. So I couldn't go back to Mongolia. So I made the really last minute decision to fly to Georgia and to just wait there for a little bit because it would be easy for me to get back to Mongolia. From there, I could just fly back to Istanbul. It was only an hour and a half flight. So I went to Georgia and I ended up having an apartment there for 3 years that I would go back and forth to Mongolia from there from. So yeah, so that was another interesting time, but I do miss Georgia a lot. I haven't been back since I drove from there in April 2023.
My goodness. Did they have the 1 year visa for tourists at that time in Georgia? So you could stay for most of the year if you needed to?
Yeah, so it was still that instance where I could stay for 365 days. And then because of the pandemic, they actually extended it so that you could stay longer. So I didn't have to do a border run at one point, which was nice. But yeah, I mean, Georgia's so easy to live in. And it was such a nice place to just sort of, be for that time period that was such a weird time in the world. But it was, I was still able to go explore the country. I bought a Nissan Xterra and then I sold that, and then at one point I had a Defender and I bought a couple motorcycles, and so I was finding ways to keep busy during that time, which was fun.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And you're a travel writer and journalist. So that has taken you to all sorts of different places as well. How did that come to be? Have you always been doing that, or is that sort of more recent-ish?
I've been writing for about 12 years now. And that was I sort of started when the blogging thing, started to become really popular and when Instagram and social media were starting to take off. I just sort of got in at the right time. Uh, and my degree is in marketing, so I'm not really like a trained journalist. It's not the thing that I always thought I would do with my life. It just so happened that, at that point in time, I just realized I was pretty good at it. I understood, how to market myself and the places that I was going to. So I sort of fell into that, which really gave me these awesome opportunities to go to these places and to go I mean, I went to Dakar with Can-Am. I've like gone diving in Fiji with Jean-Michel Cousteau. I've had these like awesome opportunities. I just went to Sweden actually last month with Thule, and I was able to see their testing facility and like get this super behind the scene access that, normal people don't get. So I love the writing stuff for that sort of opportunity that it gives me. And so, yeah, I don't do it so much anymore because I'm super busy with the tours and everything going on with Mongolia. But, I still try to also write about Mongolia and talk about that stuff as much as possible because I just want to encourage people to travel and get there and you don't even necessarily need to join my tours or anything that I'm doing, but just to learn about it and consider it and see what's, happening there because most people have no idea what Mongolia is all about. And so any sort of information that I can put out there, I try to do.
Yes, I love it. Let's dive into some information. That was the perfect segue. I loved it. For those that are interested in visiting Mongolia, which I am very interested, so I'll be listening attentively. But maybe we can start with geography and the layout of the country. What should people expect in different regions in terms of maybe, I don't know, climate or landscape? I'm sure there are unique differences in each section.
Yes, we have a little bit of everything. So we have the Gobi Desert. So that's in the south, and that's going to be your whole sort of border with China. In Western Mongolia, which is near to Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan and Mongolia don't actually touch. There's about a 50-kilometer sort of, we call it like the little fingers that don't touch. But on that side of the country, it's more mountainous. So you have these big, mountain ranges that go through that area. So that is a bit more higher in elevation, a bit more rocky, and that's more for like the hiking and the more like extreme side of things because the highest peaks are over there, and that would be the more adventurous side of the country. In the north, you have Lake Hovsgol. So Lake Hovsgol is the second largest freshwater lake in the world after Lake Baikal, and the lake is beautiful. And then in the winter, it completely freezes. And I like to call it the ice highway because basically in the wintertime, the locals just drive on it. So it's like a shortcut to get to all these little like areas on the lake. So that's in the north. And then in the east, it's a bit more flat. So it's more sort of that steppe that I think most people think of when they think of Mongolia and just that wide open space. And then in the central part, it's very green and you have hills and waterfalls and rivers, and the central part is actually my favorite because of that reason. So the more green landscape, and it's so nice to just look out and see the white. We call them gers, but yurts in the distance, and to see that white against that green with the super blue sky, it doesn't get old.
Beautiful. I'm also wondering about accessibility. So borders, obviously in the west, on the west side, you were talking about how Kazakhstan is right there, you know what I mean? But actually you can't go from one country to another. And the way that geography is means it's not super easy to get there. But I guess my question is accessibility. I mean, obviously you could fly in, we can talk about that, but if you're driving, where are you most likely to enter the country?
Yeah, so if you're driving, you're either going to come in through China or through Russia. When I drove, I made the decision to come through Russia. I exited the easternmost part of Kazakhstan, went above the Russian Altai, and then into the westernmost part of Mongolia. So that was the route that I took. But you can go through China. I mean, obviously, it's a bit more difficult with permits and having to have a guide with you the entire time. And so I didn't want to do that, especially just being me alone driving. So I took the northern Russian route. But yeah, either through Russia or through China are the two options if you're doing a land border.
And then what about for folks coming in from the east side?
So if you're coming in from the east side, I would recommend, well, if you're coming in through the east side, you're typically going to come in through China. That's usually where people are coming. And so you're going to come in through where like the Gobi Desert is. So you'll come up through the eastern part of the desert and up that way, which is a pretty common route. A lot of people come into the country that way. And that's great because as soon as you enter Mongolia there, I mean, you're down where all the really famous like landmarks are. It's a great route because you come in, you see all this like these amazing landscapes, and the red cliffs and the big singing sand dunes and the white stupa and all this stuff. And then you sort of come up to Ulaanbaatar, which is not too far from there. And then you sort of have that, like, the capital. And then you can go on from there. You can go north, you can go again to central, or you can keep going to the west and then, yeah, go on from there if you'd like.
And a temporary import permit for the vehicle and visas. What is required for visitors?
So for visitors, as soon as you come in, you should have obviously local car insurance. Visas right now are actually, I'm waiting to hear what's going to happen because there was this really big push to have a visa-free sort of 23, 24, 25. So in 2026, I'm waiting to see if they're still going to give a lot of these countries this visa-free access because there's this huge push to bring in tourism to Mongolia. That made it possible for, Australians and a lot of other countries to come in without the need for a visa, which if you do need a visa, it's pretty easy to get at this point. You just apply online. We have e-visas and it comes within a couple days. So that's not really an issue at this point, but it does cost you a little bit of money. So yeah, visas are pretty easy at the moment because yeah, like I said, there's a huge push to sort of attract tourists and tourism to Mongolia. So now is the time to come, because they are doing this push and trying to get the word out about how great it is. It's obviously going to start getting a little bit busier, and more people coming means, more crowds and more expensive and stuff like that. So now is the time to come. That's what I've been telling everybody.
Agreed. Yeah. Do you need a carnet? Everybody always wants to know. Do you need a carnet?
No, you do not.
Perfect. The carnet de passage, for those who don't know what that is basically like a passport for your vehicle, which is required in some countries, but not others. But it sounds like the temporary import permit is probably the go-to coming into Mongolia.
Yep. Yep. It's pretty easy. It was super easy when I did it. And yeah, I don't remember anything. I think that was probably the easiest land border out of all of the ones that I crossed on that journey. So yes, they made it super simple and they were super nice.
Love it. Great. And then I guess also seasonality. So this is often an interesting question to ask about, like, what's the best season? Can be difficult depending on what you're looking for. But I want to hear from you because I saw you post on social that your favorite season is fall. But I've also seen you do quite a bit of really different, interesting things in the wintertime. So I'm curious to know more.
Yes, fall is absolutely one of my favorite times. I will say, and I do have to admit, I use my heater a lot in fall. So if you're coming in fall, you either have to bring really warm stuff or, yeah, have a heater in your car that's ready to go because nights do get pretty cold. So even in September, I had a shoot in September and I was turning on my heater every night. And that was like mid-September this year. September is great because you have all of the leaves changing colors and you have really nice temperatures in the day with the sun being out, and then the nights do get cold, so you just need to be a bit prepared for that. So yeah, so fall is beautiful, and then winter for anybody who sort of wants to take on that challenge. I am not there yet. I'm working up to it. I'm still a little bit intimidated by it and by driving myself, but winter is absolutely stunning. You just have to be aware of, there's not a lot of roads, so if you're going off route, you're going to be battling lots of thick snow and the potential to be stuck, which has happened on basically every trip I've ever been on. And so you need to sort of either have a winch or follow cars with you. I definitely recommend that because, yeah, if you're traveling around in the winter, it is absolutely stunning, but it can be lethal. So you just got to be a bit more prepared. But I definitely recommend it for anybody who wants a real adventure. That's the one.
What are the sort of temperature ranges in fall and winter?
So in fall, in Celsius, you're probably looking at 15 down to 1 or 2 on average. I mean, Mongolian weather is notoriously crazy. So, I can say that now, but it'll be all over the place. There could be snow and frost one night. It could be super warm the next day. There could be rain. There could be snow. There could be anything. So you just sort of have to be a bit prepared for everything. Winter, it can be anywhere from -25 to -45, depending on where you are. It is cold, so you got to be super prepared for that. So I have seen people overlanding in winter, they have the right setup for it. I know some Mongolian guys that do take out their Troopies in the middle of winter, and they go dip in the river and then they jump into their heated Troopy, and I'm like, okay, you guys are cool, but it obviously looks beautiful and it's such an adventure. But yeah, you have to be prepared because those temperatures are no joke. So you gotta have the right equipment and, be prepared for anything that could happen, because when you are out in Mongolia, you are out there. So winter, you're not going to find as many people roaming around. At least in the summer and in the fall, there's almost always a herder or a family or somebody around. So if something goes wrong, someone's not too far away. But in the winter, most families move into the Sooms, the small towns. And so there's not going to be as many people around. So if you get stuck or if something happens, you got to be able to get yourself out. Otherwise, it could be really, really dangerous.
Good to know. In terms of fall and winter, what are some things that are unique to those seasons if you're wanting to exit your vehicle? I'm thinking cultural, food, interacting with local people. It could be anything. Favorite activities, I guess. Experiences.
So in the fall, you have everybody preparing for winter. So it's always interesting to see how the different families prepare by either going to get hay or moving their herds around to make sure that they're nice and fat for the winter coming up. It's really when people are preparing, they say that if you don't prepare properly in the fall for winter, if you don't prepare well, then you're going to have a really hard winter. So fall is a super important time for the nomadic community, and for the nomads to sort of get everything in order. So it's interesting to spend time with them around then, because they're always busy doing something, fixing fences, going to the winter camp that they'll be moving to, making sure everything's set up there, because they are nomadic. So they're moving 2, 3, 4 times a year. It depends on the family. So that's an interesting time to see that sort of, lifestyle and everything that they're doing. And then winter is just this beautiful blanket of white everywhere you look. And it's quiet and serene and just clean and crisp. And obviously it has its challenges, but just to see that. And then in winter, there's amazing festivals like the 10,000 Camel Festival. I just went to a winter horse festival. And horses are like the most respected animal in Mongolian culture. So to have a whole festival around horses is like, there were, I don't know, maybe 500 herders coming to compete in these games to show off their skills as a horseman. And that was such a cool experience. That's something even I had never done until this year. But we have festivals like that in the winter. So a camel festival, a horse festival. There's the ice festival, which happens on Lake Hofskull. So because the lake
Wow.
is frozen, they actually do the festival on the lake, which is crazy. And there's a reindeer festival at the same time. And yeah, winter is full of a lot of things that I don't think people realize are going on. So it's definitely a cool time to come. Like I said, lots of challenges, but lots of rewards, just like Mongolia always does to you.
Great stuff. I love that. Yeah, an ice sculpture and reindeer festival on a frozen lake sounds
It's unreal. I
completely
don't know anywhere
incredible.
else in the world. Yeah, I don't know anywhere else in the world where that would be the sentence that you could say about where you live. Yeah, there's a nice festival, there's sculptures on this frozen lake, and then, oh yeah, the reindeers come down and you see a reindeer race. It's like, what? Where else does that happen?
Great question.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, tell me about spring and summer as well. So I'm assuming they have their own
Yes.
differences and highlights. And does it get muddy? Are the tracks difficult with spring melt? Things like that.
Yes. Spring is super muddy. Summer and spring are very muddy because of the rains and, just the way everything is there. So spring, you can definitely expect a lot of mud. I like spring because of all the baby animals. So this is when everybody's giving birth. There's little goats running around. There's baby horses being born. Everything's sort of happening at this time. So it's always super cute to come up to a family and to see the goats coming out of their gear, because the little baby goats were in there to stay warm because it was maybe a bit cold that night. And so that's always a nice scene to come up on. So spring is definitely good for that. And it's, the wildflowers are starting to bloom, everything's starting to get green. The temperatures are still, all over the place, kind of like fall. One day you can have a warm day, the next day it could be snowing. So it's still a little bit all over the place, but generally like enjoyable, easy to sort of manage. And then once you move into summer, obviously that's when temperatures are the best. So Mongolian summer is when everybody is out and enjoying time in the countryside because the Mongolians have been inside, for the last 6, 7 months because it's been so cold. So everybody wants to be outside. Everybody's sort of going out to the countryside and camping. You'll see people in a Prius pull up to this river and set up a tent and have a full barbecue right there out of their Prius. And, you'll also be next to them in your crazy 4x4, like, oh my gosh, that was a crazy like terrain. And how did we even get here? And then the Prius next to you was like, oh yeah, that was nothing. Like, now we're going over this mountain. And you're like, what? How are they even doing that? Like Mongolians and the way they can drive a Prius, it is so impressive. And it makes me question, like, how do they do it? Because this little tiny car goes everywhere. But they're out all summer long. And so anywhere that you go, there's going to be people also out either herding and taking care of their animals or, just enjoying time outside like you are, which is super nice because, even the city Mongolians get out into the countryside and make the most of that warm weather and the nice temperatures.
Excellent. Human nature.
Yeah.
It's universal.
Thanks to Hankook Dynapro Tire for supporting this week's podcast. Head over to expeditionportal.com to learn more about mud terrain tire design as we interview their tire experts and take a close look at the Dynapro MT2 as an example of the mud terrain tire category.
Good weather. We get outside, have a picnic, enjoy all of that. So great. And in terms of camping, is it pretty easy throughout the country, just kind of pull up wherever or ask for permission to camp somewhere? What's the sort of wild camp situation like there?
Yeah, so wild camping is allowed. So there's no shortage of space in Mongolia. So, anywhere that you find a spot, you're welcome to it. I tend to always go, to a spot that no one has either seen me getting to or is a little bit off the roads or, the routes that people are going through, just because Mongolians are curious. Someone will always come up and be like, hey, what are you doing? Obviously they're speaking Mongolian and you're probably not going to speak Mongolian, so you're going to sort of go through that, but that's part of it. And, just share a little piece of whatever you're eating or a Coca-Cola or something. And, that's a nice way to sort of break the ice with them. But yeah, wild camping, you can sort of camp anywhere. If you get lost, you can always pull up to a family's ger and ask directions, or they can point and you can point, and Google Translate gets you a lot of ways, a lot of gets you pretty far these days. So, if you have a map and if you have Google Translate, they can point you in the right direction. They can sort of give you some rough directions. And then most of the time they'll invite you in for tea. And if it's getting late, they'll even tell you can sleep there. I mean, I've slept in my car, but at so many families, like houses, we'll say, just because, they've invited us in for tea. And then, it's, the sun starts to go down. And at that point, you're like, well, we might as well just stay here. And then tomorrow we can continue on. And so that's, a possibility as well. But there's no shortage of places to set up camp and to have your own space and to just sort of enjoy the landscape around you, which, anytime I can just park near a river and spend the evening just sort of sitting out there, staring at the sun going down and just enjoying the peace and quiet of the area, watching the horses go through the river, the animals come down to water. That's like, those are the best days.
So good. Are there things that you do if you're camping by yourself? Just in terms of, I guess, are you concerned about safety, or is it more like curiosity, or do you really see anybody? I guess, questions as a
I almost
solo
always
traveler.
Yeah, I almost always see somebody, no matter how much I try to hide, either behind a rock or down the river, away from where I saw the families. It's inevitable that some herder will be either moving his animals or riding through or something. They almost always stop or at least slow down to sort of look at you. Just saying a quick semino, like a quick hi, sometimes that gets the job done and you don't need to engage anymore. But a lot of times they do want to come talk to you, which is fine. And sometimes it's a family in a car and, little kids looking at you like, why are you a woman alone out here? And, the men are doing the same thing. Sometimes I have herders just alone on a horse. And, you know, I have had instances where, maybe they got a little too much into my personal space. And I just sort of, said bye or just quickly like got into the car and closed the car. And that was the end of it. And either pretended to move or did actually move. That was sort of, the worst case scenario in those instances. But people will come by no matter how sort of hard you try or try to get out of the, line of sight of things. But it's okay. They're mostly just curious. And like I said, just share something, just say like hi and just continue on with what you're doing. And usually they just sort of are looking at you the same way that we would look at them. Like, what are you doing here? Like, what is all this
Yes.
stuff? And what is all this cool stuff? And I know they want to ask sometimes, and, they do. And I'm hearing them say it in Mongolian, and, I explain it as much as possible. But yeah, they're as curious about what you're doing and what you have as what you are, as you would be to them in that same scenario. So just,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah. So just sort of engaging, as much as you feel comfortable with. But yeah, if you don't feel comfortable, just get into the car, close it up, or just say like bye. And then they usually just move on. They have stuff to do too. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about like even when we're back in Canada, like we are now, if we see a big rig with European plates come through, we're like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
yeah, who are you? What is this? Tell me everything. Oh
Right.
my gosh, yes.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. So yeah, pretty fun. I wanted to ask you too about being a good guest, like from a Mongolian perspective, if you're invited in for tea, or you were saying sharing food or Coca-Cola, but if you get an invite, what are best practices?
Yeah, so in Mongolian culture, it's rude to turn down an invitation. So if they invite you inside and you have the time to do it, do it. Go inside, have tea with them, sit down. I mean, you'll be looking at each other and you're not going to speak the same language, but that's part of that experience also. So as soon as you
Yes.
walk into a ger, you go to the left because you're a guest. And there's either little stools that you would sit at or a little table, or you just sit right on the bed. And they're going to hand you a really hot bowl of milk tea. I mean, it's going to be the hottest thing you've ever felt. It'll feel like lava. You're going to grab it with either two hands or one hand. And yeah, you sip on it as it cools down and as you can. Be careful. Like I said, it's like lava. And yeah, you just sort of finish your tea, and sometimes they'll offer you food. You can say no if you don't feel like eating, or if you would like to try whatever they're offering, try it. Go for it. Those are the biggest things. I mean, there's so many little details and so much tradition that really goes along with that. But as long as you sort of accept things with one hand, like your right hand only, or two hands, and just, you wear your shoes inside, you don't need to take off your shoes. Yeah, which most gears are so clean and like pristine that you are so shocked. Like, how is this possible? Like, I look at my car and there's dust everywhere, there's dirt everywhere, it's filthy. And then I go into a gear and it is, I mean, you can eat food off the floor. It's so clean. And I'm just like looking at them going, how do you do this? Because I cannot keep my car clean for the life of me. And I just vacuumed it like a day ago. So it's like you just start to notice little things like that. And then, yeah, I mean, whenever you feel comfortable accepting, accept and try. And who knows what they'll offer you? Maybe some organs, maybe some arag, maybe some vodka. I tend to be a bit careful when it comes to the vodka and that sort of stuff, but that's just me. I'm a woman usually traveling alone or, with a small group. And so we just keep an eye on that. But, you know, we tend to just accept everything. And then, you can graciously say, okay, I got to go. Can you point me in this direction? They're happy to do that. And then you just move on and enjoy
Great.
the experience for what it was.
Do you bring gifts usually? Is that as a
I usually have like candy bars and some candies in my car. And then if I see kids, I give them candies. Or if like I would get invited in like that, I would give them mom like a box of chocolates. Or if I had like I don't do it so much anymore because it just got too expensive, but little knives, like I would give them to the guys. But then I started going through like all of my knives and now I have no knives left. So I stopped doing that one. But just little stuff like that. And then, like I said, like Coca-Cola, and the kids love stuff like that too. Cause, and If I have it, I just give it away because why not? I mean, they've invited me in and they've given me everything that they had. So it doesn't kill me to do the same in return and to share that with them. It's always a nice little moment. And their faces are always like, yeah, thanks. Okay, yes. And the kids get so excited and they're smiling and laughing and running away and like, like hoarding it to themselves, like, look what I got. Oh my gosh. So it's always cute when they
Great. That's great. Thank you for the insight. Yeah, it's always like, because if you're coming through and you're not flying in, you're usually sort of adjusting to each country's different ways of doing things. So yeah, everything's different. So that's great. Let's talk about food a little bit. I want to hear about Mongolian food and cuisine and your favorites or where to go, what to eat. Tell me.
Yeah, so the three main staple dishes will be boots, which is like a dumpling, and then hosher, which is like a fried empanada. And then my favorite dish is called tsuven, and that is like a fried noodle and dried meat dish. And that's my favorite. That's the one I always request when I go to a family's house. But those are the three things that you'll usually find, when you're with a nomadic family that they want to serve you. And those are the common things that you would find at like a Mongolian restaurant in the city. Obviously, there's a lot more to that, soups and rice dishes and stuff like that. But those are like the three sort of staples that I would say most people are familiar with. When you're in UB, you can easily find, little street stalls where you can get hosher. Hosher is super popular in the summer, especially around the autumn time, because the hosher is normally like a half moon shape, but in summer during autumn, which autumn is our big, we call it the festival of three manly sports, and that's when wrestling, archery, and horse racing competitions happen. So during that festival, the hosher becomes a circle, and so it becomes this like flat pancake. And those are actually my favorite because the ratio of like meat to bread, that's like, you're always judging everybody's kosher by that. You're lifting it up and you're seeing if you can see through the dough and like how much meat is in there. And, did they use like fresh spring onion and stuff like that?
Ooh.
So if you're coming in July, look for the round flat kosher. That's the one thing that you have to try.
What kind of meat is usually in all of those things?
It will almost always be mutton. So
Yeah,
Mongolians don't slaughter young animals, so it's usually the older sheep that they would serve you.
noted. And beverages. You mentioned molten hot lava tea.
Yes.
Any other
So
favorites?
so sutete, so that's like the salty milk tea. Every family, everybody, that's all that Mongolians drink. You will really not see them drink any water. It's usually only sutete that they drink. So that will be every time you walk into a ger, you'll get offered that. That's the first thing. That's the first greeting. So anytime you walk into a ger, you get offered a white food. So that would be the sutete. And then they'll offer you dried curds as soon as you come in as well. And, these will be curds that they made, you know, recently or a long time ago, but they've had them because they'll eat them throughout the year. Drink wise, you will also find arag in the summer. So arag is the fermented mare's milk. So that is also around the autumn time in July. So July and August would be when they would make arag. And arag is the milk that they take from the mares and then they churn it basically 1,000 times a day for weeks on end. And they do it in this big leather sort of pouch that sits inside their ger. And yeah, weeks later they serve it. It's like a fermented beverage. And that's kind of like the countryside equivalent of beer. You'll see it in like a big Coca-Cola bottle on the side of the road being sold. And so if you're adventurous enough to try it, I definitely recommend it, but drink slowly because it's full of a lot of good gut bacteria that may be too good for your gut, but it's definitely
Right.
worth trying. Yeah, if you
Might
want to
need
clean
to
yourself out, that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
take it easy.
Yeah. So enjoy
Awesome.
enjoy at your own pace, but just be cautious. Yes.
Use caution. Nice. I imagine in Ulaanbaatar, there's quite a food scene and it has sort of more international flavors. I imagine just being a big city.
Yeah, so the city, I mean, in the city you can get Italian food, Mexican food, Korean food. Korean food's great in UB. Japanese food, Chinese food. I mean, you can get really everything. There's not going to be a million options, but we have a couple of everything. So it's easy to find, places to take a break from Mongolian cuisine a little bit. But if you really want to eat Mongolian cuisine, there's a lot of, local restaurants that are either like the typical like hole in the wall mom and pop sort of style place that you would expect, or you can go to like Asiana, which is a bit more elevated, sort of Mongolian and Asian fusion sort of stuff. So you can, choose your culinary adventure when you're in the city. I tend to eat at, I don't know, more like I tend to eat at home a lot just because I'm picky about what I'm eating and I'm constantly on the road. So to be home and to actually cook a meal is like sort of nice in my opinion. But yeah, if you wanted to eat out in the city, like La Rosa is a really big like tapas place where people come and, there's a pool table and a nice bar. And there's a couple places like that around town. And, we also have a couple, like we have two nice jazz clubs now and there's plenty to
Nice.
do and see, places to eat and stuff to do. So yeah, you can always choose your adventure there.
Great. I know you have quite a few tips, endless tips on meanwhilemongolia.com on the
Yes.
website, right? Lots of guides for all sorts of different things from Ulaanbaatar to out there and lots of different tips for specifics. But in terms of cooking, like if an overland traveler is coming through, one of my favorite things to do is to go to the supermarket or the open air markets. And I'm wondering if you have any tips in terms of which ones to go to and any insight into like specific ingredients that are really fun to try or buy in the supermarket or at the markets.
Yeah, so if you're in Ulaanbaatar, so definitely do your shopping while you're in Ulaanbaatar because that will be where you can get the most variety of things. If you want more specific stuff, you would go to Good Price. That would be the more like gourmet, where you could maybe find gluten-free options of things and, that sort of stuff. So Good Price would be that sort of place to shop. Noman Supermarket is honestly where I get everything. It's a typical supermarket that has, A to Z on the shelves. The fun things to buy in Mongolia are terig, so the yogurt. So anything dairy is so good in Mongolia. So I buy a lot of yogurt and milk and, local sort of curds and cheeses and stuff. Beware of the camel milk. Only buy that again if you would like some digestive help. So certain milks are used for certain things. Inside the supermarkets, you can find like jerkies, like locally made jerkies. There's this red bag, I think it's called idlik, and it's like a jerky that's locally made that I always take bags of that with me on the trip because it's obviously so easy just to eat it as a snack when you're driving. Meats, you'll find any meat possible that you would like. Usually, like I said, the Mongolians tend to eat a lot of mutton, but when you're in the city, you can find good beef. And there's a place called BB Butcher, and that's also where I buy a lot of like pre-made like sausages and steaks that are already seasoned and, vacuum packed so that I can throw them in my fridge and then just take them with me. And when I'm ready, cut open that bag and cook that. So BB Butcher is a place that I usually stop before I head out of the city and load up the cooler, the fridge. Because yeah, they have the best sort of variety of stuff. But yeah, you can find everything, and Emart is a great place to get everything, including like if you needed a different like I don't know if your tent was even I don't know, maybe you don't need a tent, but if you wanted some sort of camping equipment like a new chair or something outside of Emart in the summer, there's usually little stalls with like camping equipment, like, all the Stanley thermoses and new stoves and everything that, the locals are buying from there. So if you needed to restock on something, specific like that, that's a good place to find that stuff as well. So, you can find everything in the city.
Great. And then I imagine as you head away, it gets a little harder to find some of those specific items, but I imagine the small-ish communities might have some basics.
Yeah, so each town will have like a little shop and a little sort of store. The variety will be a lot less, obviously, but you can get by. And yeah, I tend to, again, load up on meat, especially before I leave the city, because once you sort of get out there, it's not that it's, you know, bad, but your selection is a lot less. And, sometimes I end up just buying stuff directly from a herder because that would be the only place where I could find fresh meat like that. But yeah, the little stores will have snacks and chips and stuff, but anything super specific, like gluten-free, like I mentioned, or if you needed something like dairy or vegan or something, I would always buy that in the city beforehand.
Definitely. Great. Let's talk about some of your favorite experiences or memories in Mongolia.
Oh, my favorite experiences and memories. This has nothing to do with driving, but last June, we set off on a 6-day horse riding expedition to this place called the Blue Lake. And it's really deep in this province that I do spend a lot of time in, either on my tours or just by myself driving through. And I took one of my friends, and we had another client. Her name was Michelle, and it was me and 2 other guides plus 3 horse guides. So we were, how many does it make? 8 people. And we were on obviously 8 horses, and then we had 3 pack horses, and we rode for 6 days to this really remote alpine lake and went swimming in the lake. And it's a very sacred lake because it's so hard to reach. And before you get to the lake, there's an owa, which is a structure that it comes in different forms, but this one was made of timber, sort of stacked like a teepee. And then there were sacred sashes all around it, and there were offerings inside of milk and grains and stuff. So we did our little worship ceremony at the Owa and did our 3 circles around it and gave it a milk offering and stuff. And then went to the lake, and that was just a super special sort of experience because it was something that I really wanted to do. And I never have the time to sort of explore some of this stuff the way I like to because, I have tours and I don't always have enough time and, there's always something to be done or something to be seen. So to actually take the time to go do this journey, that also meant a lot to the horse herder that we were with. It was one of the lakes that he makes like a yearly pilgrimage to. So he led us on this journey. And along the way, we stayed with the families that he knew. And, every day it was sort of a different scenery and different stuff going on. We had a couple exciting moments, but overall it was really like beautiful and just sort of amazing journey to really like also get my horse riding skills sort of, up to speed and to be able to spend 6 days on a horse. It's not as easy as it sounds. And I ride fairly regularly. So that was a sort of challenge to myself. And so that was definitely one of my favorite parts of last year was doing that sort of trek.
Sounds all time.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to do stuff like that, but maybe in the future, hopefully.
Awesome. Great. Let's talk about, we're going back in time again, bringing the Troopy to Mongolia from Georgia. So that was quite a big trip. And I think you said like your first big sort of overland drive. It's quite far. So anyways, it was really fun because there's a collective article that I collaborated with a bunch of travelers, as you know, because you were one of them. And I think it's a fall issue of Overland Journal. So I was very honored to be able to include you in that article. Yes, go read it now. But you kind of talked about this journey in that article and gave some great tips for planning trips because you have so much experience planning your own personal trips and also leading other people on trips and just constructing sort of itineraries and hot tips for Mongolia. But yeah, this is a fascinating area of the world to travel through. So storytelling moment. Tell me about that experience. Driving from Georgia, the country, through Russia to Mongolia.
Yeah, I just went all in. That was my first really big sort of overlanding thing. And that was really the first time I'd ever done border crossings and my first big journey in that car. So it was a very, profound journey for me in a lot of ways. My original route had me going up into Russia from Georgia through like where Dagestan and Chechnya are basically, and going up in between that corridor. But because of the war in Ukraine, I had to hold off on that journey for a little bit. And then I decided, when the time was right, that I'm not going to go that route, basically going north and out of Georgia that way, but instead going sort of east and into Azerbaijan, which presented its own issues because the border to Azerbaijan was not open. I still don't even think it's open.
It's
So I
not.
had to ship,
Yeah.
I had to ship my car to Azerbaijan, which really it should have been like an 8-hour drive, which was the most frustrating part. So I shipped my car to Baku. I had to wait for it to get imported there, and then yeah, got on the ferry, went across the Caspian Sea, and then yeah, drove basically the length of Kazakhstan as far as I could because I wanted to spend as little time in Russia as possible because my car had Georgian plates on it. And at that time, there were all of the import restrictions, and Russia was having, all of these sort of issues with getting things into the country. So any car that came in with a different plate was being sort of looked at very closely. So I wanted to sort of avoid that as much as possible. So I drove basically as far east in Kazakhstan as I could and then entered Russia there and then up and over the Altai Mountains and then down into Mongolia. I think it took me 2 days in Russia. I tried to do it as quickly as possible because there were cops everywhere on that route. And I was just trying to not, get any attention put on me because the week or two prior to me leaving, there was a couple who had left Tbilisi and driven north through the route that I was originally thinking. And when they were in Russia, they got pulled over and the wife was arrested and put in jail. And the gentleman had to basically drive the car back into Georgia, and it was like a whole mess. So then I got a little bit sort of freaked out, like, okay, if it's just me and I go missing, like no one's gonna know. Like who's gonna know where I am?
Fair.
So yeah, so I figured, okay, let me avoid that route. Let me go, this other way and just trying to get through as quickly as possible. And I had a beautiful campsite in Russia one night. It was on this big canyon and there was nobody around and it was just very, I mean, I was up in the Altai Mountains, so snow and, just quiet and crisp, clean air. And it was stunning. I wish I would have maybe spent more time exploring it, but I was a bit freaked out and it was my first big journey. So, but I do have a 3-year visa and it expires April 2026. So I have toyed with the idea of going back, but we'll see. It's running out of time if I make that decision.
Yeah.
Hankook Dynapro Tire welcomes you to visit expeditionportal.com and enjoy a series of adventures from the Jeep Beach event in Florida, the Bronco Stampede and Jeep Invasion in Tennessee, and the Off-Road Expo in California. Thanks, Hankook.
That's
Could
something that I learned. I feel like I learned it from you, actually. I was reading, either we spoke about it or I read an article that you had written, and I was surprised to see that Americans get a 3-year multi-entry visa
Yeah, I
to
was actually
Russia.
shocked I got it because, I mean, it was when the war with Ukraine had sort of started and was still going and at its sort of peak. And I applied for the visa in Tbilisi, which I think was the right move because, yeah, it was granted and I got this 3-year visa. And I didn't even really expect a 3-year visa. I was just sort of like just applying and whatever they gave me, they gave me. And I even posted about it the other week on some like Facebook group of someone asking, like, oh, if I wanted to enter Russia, like, I said, well, I got this, 3-year multiple entry visa. And the person wrote back and said, that's not possible. It doesn't exist. And I was like, well, I have it and I'm looking at it right now. So it clearly does.
Yes.
But I mean, I didn't even really know that it existed either. And I got it. And I don't know how because everybody at that same point in time was getting denied. So why mine was granted, I have no idea. But I will forever be grateful because, yeah, it allowed me to get my car from Georgia to Mongolia and have that journey.
And the border crossings were a little challenging.
Yeah, I mean, traveling alone as a female, and like I said, my plates were Georgian, the car passport was Georgian, like the car, yeah, like title was Georgian. And then I'm obviously American and I'm by
Right.
myself. And they're looking at this car going, this is your car? And I'm like, yeah. And you're going to Mongolia? And I'm like, yeah. So, a lot of things in their mind were like, what? Like, this doesn't make sense. And yeah, when I entered Russia, the agent, I mean, I went into this back room and I was pulled aside and it was this whole thing. But he took my phone and started going through my Instagram. At one point, he hit these weird numbers that brought this screen up on my phone that I had never seen. And
What?
I basically think they put tracking on my phone and I don't know. He wrote down all of the answers to every question that he asked me. The guy, when I was going in, was fairly friendly. He was a photographer. So he was saying, like, oh, there's these nice spots. I see that you take these pretty photos and stuff. And I had deleted everything saying I was a journalist and, no articles on there at all, nothing like that. So, he was friendly enough, but it was intimidating to be interviewed for an hour and a half with him. But
For sure.
and then when I left, the agent, when I was leaving, was a lot tougher. But he already knew the answers to all of the questions that the first guy had asked me, and he was asking me again. So I was like, oh crap, okay, I have to make sure I answer everything exactly the same way. Not that like I was lying, but you just get nervous in those situations, like, and then he would like probe me a little bit more on certain things. And I was like, what do you want, man? Like, what are you getting at? And then finally he was like, you can go. And then he followed me down when I was leaving, and he was like looking at the car. And then at some point he kind of gave me like this like nod of approval, like, all right, cool car. And I was like, okay, bye. It's like, oh my gosh, get me out of here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I would be nervous too, for sure. And it's interesting how different stories from different travelers over the last few years, because my husband and we went the way that you didn't go, from
Okay.
Georgia into Kazakhstan, and it was fine. But we had Canadian plates, which could be interpreted as bad or good. I don't really know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. And I wasn't on my own, and I didn't have a Georgian car. And there's like, you're not really sure. You're just not sure.
Yeah,
So
because people were at that
yeah,
time buying cars in Georgia and then driving them into Russia and then reselling them for a lot of money. So then the cops along that route sort of caught on to that. And so they would pull over those cars coming in and ask for a bribe because they knew that that person was about to sell this car for some like crazy extravagant amount. And I was like, what if they decide they want my car? Like,
right.
what am I going to do about it? Like, what
Yeah,
if they say I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So it all turned out okay, but yeah,
for
that's always
sure. Yeah.
nerve-wracking. Yeah,
It's
when I
always
got to Mongolia,
interesting.
I like, oh, can like unclench my butt cheeks. I think I stayed in a hotel for like 2 nights just sleeping. Like, I'm safe, I'm fine, I made it.
Yeah, and it's a long drive too. Like, and you were just straight shot, right? So yeah, that's
Yeah,
tiring.
I went pretty quick.
Driving
Yeah, I
driving
went
all
pretty
day.
quick. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's great. Now you made it. Your vehicle's in Mongolia now. It's Mongolian. So
Yeah,
that's
she's
and
Mongolian now. She got imported. She's never leaving.
great. Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you. You posted. I don't know if this is on your website or Instagram or what, but it was a very comprehensive list of Mongolian books that you enjoy, and I wanted to know kind of like what your favorite one is.
Yes, I actually just finished The Green-Eyed Llama, which is super interesting on the perspective of like the Soviet times in Mongolia and the purges that they did with the lamas and the monks and the creatives at that time. So that's if you're interested in history, that's a really insightful sort of look at that. What other books do I like about Mongolia? It's called Hearing Birds Fly is the name of it, and it's about a woman who is sort of like me. I felt like I sort of resonated with her writing a lot because she had moved to Mongolia and was living in this really remote village, and just about her everyday life there. That was very interesting because for me, I was like connecting so many dots to the way that she was living and the things that she was experiencing. So that's a really good insight into that sort of daily life of a nomadic or local family and what they experience and using an outhouse and how you get water and just this stuff that you don't sort of think about. So that's also one of my favorite books. But yeah, that list, there's a lot of books on there I still need to read. And I'm adding to it every time a new one gets recommended. So yeah, there's a lot of good books on that list. So I recommend all of them.
Great stuff. Yeah, I was immediately like adding them all to my Goodreads list. Just so excited. I love resources like that. So yeah, thank you. But what's happening for you next year in 2026?
Well, I am returning to Mongolia probably in February. And before that, my partner actually lives in Ghana. And he is also building out a Land Cruiser 78 Troopy. And we are
Ooh,
talking about I know. And we are talking about driving it from Accra, from Ghana, where he's based, to Nigeria, because he has some work in Nigeria that is taking him there. And so we're talking about doing that driving route, which I think you
great.
probably know a lot about that right now.
Tiny bit.
Or yes.
Tiny bit.
So we're starting to think about that. It depends on if his invite for this project comes through. And if that does, then we're gonna start planning that and try to make that happen. But yeah, that's the immediate adventure, and then returning to Mongolia, and then tours resume. And I'll be in Mongolia most of the year again. And as soon as it warms up a little bit, I'll take the Troopy out, probably starting in April, and just start driving. And I want to start to, I was actually thinking about, which routes I wanted to start taking this year, and the places that I wanted to explore. So maybe, and I was also thinking about posting more of that. And then if someone wanted to join me, or if someone was going to be
Fun.
there. So I think I might try to do that a bit more this year, make it more sort of accessible to join me on those sort of journeys. If you follow me on Instagram, I'll post that. But yeah, that's sort of what I'm thinking about.
Great stuff. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Breanna. When or where? Where can we find you online?
Yeah, so my website is meanwhileinmongolia.com. And then the Instagram for that is Meanwhile in Mongolia. And then my personal Instagram is Breanna J. Wilson.
Fantastic. So we'll find all your tour information on Meanwhile in Mongolia. There are tons of really helpful tips and best ofs and just a ton of stuff on there. And yeah, great, beautiful imagery from Mongolia on Instagram. And I love following along with your adventures and tours and all sorts of things. So thank you so much for what you do. And thank you also for joining me on the Overland Journal podcast. I've been looking forward to this episode for quite some time. It's been really fun chatting.
It has. It's been so nice. So I hope to see you and everybody else in Mongolia.
Deal.
Yes. Yes. I love that.
Awesome. Thank you, Breanna. Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
thank you also to the Overland Journal podcast listeners for tuning into today's episode. We will catch you next time.